This is a download from BFM 89.9, the business station.
The rise of China as a world economic and political power is undeniable. Tensions over competing territorial claims in the South China Sea are just one instance of this fact. In the cyber world, China's presence is being felt as well. A United States-based cybersecurity company, FireEye, recently launched a report entitled APT 30, the mechanics of a decade-long cyber espionage operation. The report claims that the APT 30 is a group of hackers supported by the government of China, and that this group has been targeting Southeast Asian countries for over a decade to gain sensitive information on the region. Bryce Boland is the Chief Technical Officer of FireEye Inc. He describes the findings of the report.
First of all, they were targeting diplomats and journalists to understand information about political developments in the region, and also to understand position of governments and journalists about the legitimacy of the PRC. We also saw that this group was targeting information about corporate business plans and, in some cases, design information about products that were developed in Southeast Asia and India. And we also saw information being targeted about military preparedness and how governments were preparing for boundary disputes between some of the countries in the region.
The report notes that the alleged espionage activity went largely undetected for more than a decade.
This group was able to operate without changing their core infrastructure for nearly 10 years. And that's only really possible if that group is being very successful in achieving their mission of stealing information without being detected, and therefore they never needed to change their mode of operation. Now, the obvious thing that you would realize from that is that the targets have not been effective in detecting and therefore responding to these attackers. So the implications are fairly broad. For those companies that have been targeted, or those governments that have been targeted, some of their most sensitive information may have been stolen, and it may be difficult for them to identify what was taken if they haven't had the ability to detect these attacks and then investigate what the attackers did.
There are indicators that could potentially help organizations determine if they're under attack.
With that report, we've released all of the indicators of compromise. These indicators can be used by an organization to look for signs that this group has either targeted them or exploited them. So companies and governments can work out, based on that information, if they have been a victim of this group. Unfortunately, because of the nature of these attacks, the attack group can easily change their code to avoid those indicators being seen. So in future, organizations need to be able to detect previously unseen attacks that take place in their environment. And it's not enough to just detect those attacks. They need to be able to respond to them to kick the attacker out before the attacker can do damage to that organization.
Krishna Rajagopal is the Chief Executive Officer of the APT Consulting Group, an IT security firm. We asked him for an assessment of the FireEye report.
It doesn't come as a surprise. A lot of organizations or countries around the world do engage in such activity. That means, engaging in advanced system threats, cyber espionage. With the report specifically, I think we can use the report to understand the characteristics of the malware. But one thing that tickles me is that right after the table of contents, FireEye is very quick to come to a conclusion and say that such an effort led us to believe that this is sponsored, which is fair. But they go on to say that most likely by the Chinese government. I don't think there's enough evidence to say that this is for sure from the Chinese government, although it may seem as if it came from the Chinese government. Another thing that I would like to add is that we all know out there that there's proxies and there's rogue domains that we can set up. So if I were to put a blame on, let's just say, Japan, I could set up some servers in Japan. I could put proxies in Japan and make it look like the malware was written in Japanese. But that was not the case. One more thing that we've noticed from our experience is that it's fact of life. a country engages in such a thing, they employ humans. Now, let's just say they employ 100 people who are their cyber army. These 100 people are humans. You are going to have a couple of them that are going to turn rogue. You are going to have a couple of them that want to make an extra quick buck after working hours. They want to do an extra part-time job. We have seen many cases where these cyber soldiers have actually done certain unauthorized things on the side, even without the knowledge of their government or their employer. So there are all these elements of doubt, of course. Having said that, while we can use the report is brilliant in terms of understanding the characteristics of the malware, but we can't really use the report to come to the conclusion, or rather the same conclusion that FireEye did ever so quickly.
So while Rajagopal is skeptical of the allegations of China's involvement in the hacking, he nevertheless advises firms and institutions to be prepared to deal with cyber attacks.
What FireEye's IOCs are doing is basically looking for callbacks. So if what FireEye has done is identified, let's just say 100, 200 callback servers or command and control servers where these malwares seem to be calling back to. Now, if there's any machine in your network calling back to a known or even an unknown botnet-like server, then FireEye starts investigating or analyzing that traffic. So if that is if you have FireEye in your environment. If you don't have FireEye in your environment, the indicators of compromise are pretty much looking at is any attempt made to call back to a particular server? Is there any modifications? Now, while the malware coder may change some parts of the code, there will be certain signs still left.
That was Krishna Rajagopal, Chief Executive Officer at the APT Consulting Group. Earlier, we heard from Bryce Boland, Chief Technical Officer at FireEye Inc. Today, the Malaysian government agency calling itself Cybersecurity Malaysia has been reported as saying it will not investigate the allegation until a complaint is made over the FireEye report. I'm Sharad Kuttan, reporting for BFM.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To find more great interviews, go to bfm.my or find us on iTunes. BFM 89.9, the business station.